Yes, I did.
Can you give us an overview of the events for you that kind of define this racial reckoning? And we can start it at 2012 if you like for the Trayvon Martin.
I think the first thing that really starts off is Trayvon Martin and the response to Trayvon Martin by Trayvon Martin and the Black Shattering class, and how that's kind of taken to be this clarion moment of death by police, that is taken on to start, like Dream Defenders, Black Lives Matter. Then we have Mike Brown. This is another thing that goes in Ferguson. We have all these varieties of incidents of death by cop that cause, and really what's really happening is that a commonality that happens so frequently that it's almost unrecognizable in most lives of Black people is becoming publicized because of social media. Because people have cameras and they're showing this, it's becoming more and more public. But people are not actually talking about data and realizing that white people get shot by cops as much as Black people per capita in this country in terms of the overall Bulgarian numbers, and if not more in some cases. And what happens is that this data becomes racially reduced to just like there's an assault on Black people, and it's easy to present it this way, but the emotionality of these homicides breed a whole kind of political air that, like, there's an assault. And this is happening during the Obama administration. And his feckless inability to handle it kind of caused riots in the streets, all kinds of things that you wouldn't have not have thought you would have seen during the first Black president. So what you start to see is that the Black chattering class, the Black liberal chattering class, is responding to this as with a kind of like liberal assumption that we need to have some kind of movement, quote unquote, as if what and how that is, what that movement should look like is not really addressed. But all of it is under the rubric of racial reductionism without addressing the actual class disparities of political economy that have gotten Black people into this position.
Toure?
All that stuff Pascal said. I mean, when you first put the question to me, Jason, I thought instantly, of course, of George Zimmerman's acquittal, the murder of Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman's acquittal, hashtag Black Lives Matter, Ta-Nehisi Coates' the case for reparations. Of course, the murder of George Floyd. But actually, I mean, for me, a more interesting spin on this question is why the sudden interest in racial justice among Democrats, liberals, and corporations. And if you rephrase the question or reframe it that way, as important as those things that Pascal said are, I think when you get down to it, the reason that the Dems and liberals who had co-signed, the other side of race reductionism, right? The underclass ideology and other sort of racial metaphors for, or I should say racialist, accounts for inequality and crime and the like. I would say that the reason that liberals, Dems, and corporations got into racial justice comes down to a few things on top of what Pascal said. Bernie Sanders' challenge to Hillary Clinton, Hillary Clinton's loss to Donald Trump, the Trump presidency, crucially, the pandemic having coincided with the popularity of Medicare for all, and Biden's South Carolina primary win were all, I think, pivotal to explaining why, liberals, Dems, corporations got into racial justice. I mean, just think about Biden's South Carolina primary win. Healthcare was one of the major concerns of voters in South Carolina. I think something like 41%, according to exit polls, of voters in South Carolina said healthcare was their, one of their major issues, their main issue, I think. And Biden oddly won the vote there on that issue. I think 50% of the people who voted for Biden indicated that healthcare was one of their issues. Likewise, and Sanders, I think, only got 22%. Income inequality, 21% of South Carolina voters said income inequality was what it motivated them. Biden got 45% of the vote. Sanders just 23%. Interestingly enough, those respondents who were asked if the U.S. economy needed a major change, a minor change, 36% said that it needed a minor change. 47% of them went for Biden. Only 15% went for Sanders. And then those who said that the economy needed a complete overhaul, which is about 53% of respondents, 49% went for Biden and only 22% went to Sanders. And what's the relevance of this? That the Dems understood that these signature Sanders issues were very popular, and one of the ways to take us out of that frame was to insist among corporations, Dems, liberals, that the real issues, the real defining issues of the moment were the racial reckoning, not the economic issues. I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I don't see how anyone could see them as mutually exclusive who is serious about improving the lives of Black Americans. But certainly the framing that we got insisted that these were mutually exclusive issues, right? So I think, again, in addition to all those important points that Pascal made, if what has extended the life or what has made racial justice or the Great Awakening, or whatever you want to call it, the racial reckoning moment, such a big deal, is not that Black and brown people have insisted on the need for redress, because we've long insisted on the need for redress, right? I mean, what made it such a big deal is that the Democrats, the liberals, and corporations have co-signed it, and they co-signed it to take it in a direction intended to take us away from improving the material lives of disproportionately Black and brown people. Oh, and other Americans too.
Good, Cedric. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I come at this from a different angle because in 2012, 2013, I was a college student when Trayvon Martin was killed, and I went to grad school in part to try to, in some ways, train to become sort of an anti-racist trainer or diversity trainer, because of just being upset that it seemed like at the time that a lot of folks who I knew from the town that I grew up in weren't motivated like I was to talk about or deal with the issue of racism. And I wanted to figure out how could I sort of be that diversity trainer, that anti-racist trainer, to be on the right side of history. And in grad school, it was pretty jarring because as I was trying to, study and build on the work from scholars like who study structural racism, like Eduardo Bonilla Silva and others, and like some of the critical whiteness studies folks, I was also studying at the same time the conflict between administrators who claim to be anti-racist and student activists who were pissed off and saying that the administrators don't care about racism. And I remember meeting a ton with Zina Magubani, who you all have had on the show before. She's one of my good friends. I remember going to her office time and time again saying that like the structural racism frame, the anti-racist frame is not helping me to understand why is it that administrators and other professionals and managers are voicing support for diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism. And on the other hand, when it comes to talking about practical issues that students and employees face at colleges, how come they weren't saying anything about those? And she and I were debating for hours on end, time and time again, because I was saying the issue is not the frame, or the frame I was using. The issue was that perhaps I was just misinterpreting what was going on. Perhaps I was crazy. And over time, through debate and through more investigation, over time, she's the one that started to put me on to, all right, you need to read Barbara Field's work on racecraft. You need to look at the work from Toure and from Adolph Reed and Cedric Johnson. And the more and more that I started to read and pick up on and understand the work that they were doing on race reductionism and racecraft, the more it became clear that the issue wasn't the data. The issue was my prior frame into thinking that basically using structural racism or anti-racist frame to make sense of everything, that it became real that was incompatible with the reality on the ground. And it was through those conversations and through that debate that it became clear to me, and that I got a better understanding of the fact that, unfortunately, for decades, the language of diversity, equity, inclusion, and even more recently, anti-racism, is often used during these crisis moments by employers, increasingly by corporate managers and administrators and professionals, in part as a bludgeon to silence and to delegitimize folks who are talking about practical material needs on the ground. And it keeps being used in that way, in part because it works, and in part because it works for the folks who have the megaphone. And so the racial reckoning, if you will, for me, was kind of like a huge shock in my own political awakening, to really gain a better sense and to really appreciate the fact that, unfortunately, as Cedric Johnson wrote in one piece, that unfortunately blackwashing is a legit phenomenon and is used often mostly because it works.